All right. Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, we're going to talk about Chapter 13 of the Courtroom of the Pretrial and Trial Process. This is kind of a fun chapter because I'm a trial attorney, criminal trial attorney. So, yeah, I can give you some personal stories and just some things I know personally about court. All right, as an introduction, the pretrial and trial phases of the criminal justice system strike a balance between efficient prosecution of criminal offenders on one hand and democratic participation in the criminal justice system and protection of defendants against unfair and arbitrary prosecutions on the other hand. So there's a lot in the midst in trial. So once you get to trial, it's a very important part of the process, and there are a lot of rights and a lot of rules that go into it. The preliminary hearing first and foremost. With all that stuff we've been talking about, with other rules that apply when we talk about motions to suppress, that's usually during a preliminary hearing. We usually file motions, and those motions are heard. In preliminary hearings. The preliminary hearing is a mini trial in which a magistrate or a judge determines whether there is sufficient evidence to bind over a defendant for trial or whether the defendant should be released. A preliminary hearing is not constitutionally required. In indictment states, the prosecutor may bypass the preliminary hearing by taking the case immediately to the grand jury. In information states, the prosecutor may file an information and may bring a charge either before a preliminary hearing or before a grand jury. So that's just pretty much the part of the process. And I'm sorry, that's not where we do pretrial motions. Scratch that. This is just the part where they have to take their evidence before somebody. It's not really when I say body, I mean body of people, uh, a grand jury of sorts, and we'll talk about that to determine whether there's enough evidence and probable cause for the case to go forward and be bound up or moved up to superior court. And that's in the state court situation. Of course, that also applies in federal court. Now, you heard me say grand jury. What is a grand jury? So, the grand jury is charged with the responsibility of determining whether to indict an individual for a crime. The grand jury may agree that an individual has committed a crime and return a true bill, or determine that evidence does not support the criminal charge and return a no bill. The grand jury may decide to undertake an independent investigation and may issue a presentment or a report. The grand jury is technically independent of the prosecution. In practice, the grand jury possesses several powers that make it a particularly powerful arm of the prosecutor. Now, grand juries, how's it work? A grand jury is usually a body of about 12 to 18 people. Now, that's different than a jury, what we call a petite jury. The petite jury determines guilt and innocence in an actual trial. The grand jury, they do their work before trial. So, a district attorney, he charges a defendant with a crime, a felony, of course, and at that point, there are many hurdles to jump before that district attorney or prosecutor can bind that person over and move the case up to the felony trial court. So this is the indictment process. So what happens is the district attorney takes his case, all of his evidence in a room, private room, and he gets to present his case in front of the grand jury. And this is 12 to 18 people. Now these people are decided upon based upon just like a regular petite jury. It's pretty much a cross section of society that is chosen, or wherever a cross section of the community that is chosen based upon voter registration. So that's another reason why voting is so important. It's not just about voting for candidates, but being registered to vote also qualifies you. When you're on a grand jury or you're on a petite jury, your vote does count. You're one of 12 votes. And that determines whether a person in the grand jury setting is going to be whether there's enough evidence for a person to even be taken to trial for the case to go forward. Or in a petite jury, your vote in the democratic it's a democratic process can determine whether a person is actually guilty or innocent.